Welcome to the Bible Seminary podcast. On today's episode, we will hear the story of Dr. Lynn Lewis. Dr. Lewis has over 35 years of experience in business, education, and ministry. He currently serves as the president for the Bible Seminary located in Katy, Texas. Let's join our hosts Blake Quimby and Karen Coolidge as we journey through the story of Dr. Lewis.
Well, let's start off. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
We live in Sugar Land. I have a wife, 3 kids. My daughter's the oldest. She's married. And I'm about to have a baby this summer, so we're about to be grandparents.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And then I have an older son, Mark, and then a younger son, Scotty. My wife's the head of a Christian school in Houston, so we both do Christian schools. I work with adults, and she works with kids.
Both in ministry. So tell us a little bit about your backstory. Where are you from?
So backstory, I grew up in Georgia. I was actually born in Athens, Georgia, what is now on the campus of the University of Georgia. And then I actually lived in Athens and then went back to the University of Georgia for college. Wendy and I got married. We lived there our first year of marriage. But I kind of call Athens home. My ancestors are from that North Georgia, Tennessee area. And then I served as an engineer, worked as an engineer right out of college, and then served in ministry. But my background actually is I became a Christian when I was 13, just very strong Christian, came to faith, started reading my King James small print Bible with the olive wood cover that my grandmother had given me when she had gone to the Holy Land back in the 70s.
Now, do you still have that Bible?
Of that Bible, yes.
The words of Jesus in red?
The words of Jesus are in red. The print's so small that I'm too old to read it now, but it's there. Really thin sheets of paper. But I started reading that when I was 13, gave my life to Jesus. And what was interesting is when we had moved from Athens, my mother and dad had said, "Don't you want to join the church before you leave?" Because I had grown up in that church. So I did. I was 10 years old. So I answered all the questions, do you believe in all these things? And I did. And I did, I think, at my 10-year-old self, believe at the time what, I didn't know any better. But then when I was 13, sitting on the back row at a Christian camp in North Georgia up in the mountains on Lookout Mountain, and pastor's up there preaching, and he says, do you believe in Jesus Christ as your saving Lord? Do you believe the Bible's the Word of God? He goes through these things. And I'm sitting on the back row with these kids, 13 years old, 7th and 8th grade age, I guess. And I was thinking, yeah, I do believe all those things. And as I was saying that in my heart, he was inviting everybody forward, and I was like, well, I've already joined the church, so why would I go forward? But as he was saying that, I really saw Jesus at the altar there. There was a valley behind, there's an outdoor chapel, there's a valley back there. I saw Jesus standing in front of the altar in a vision, just a brief glimpse, and behind him were angels, and he was welcoming me into the kingdom.
Beautiful.
And I was 13 years old, and man, I just committed to Jesus at that moment. And again, the version of myself at 13 believed what I believed then. As you go through high school and then get into college, I had another moment in college, my freshman year of college. I was in the Redcoat Band playing in 1980 with Herschel Walker on the football field. That was his first year. And just exciting times. We didn't lose any games. It was awesome. But that fall, I'd gone to a pep rally, and a football player from the University of Georgia spoke at a pep rally. He gave his testimony at the University of Georgia at a pep rally. So it was awesome. A lot of Christians were there, but that wasn't really, we were celebrating the University of Georgia. But afterwards, milling around in the crowd, a friend of mine and we ran up on this guy, and he said, what's the most important thing in your life? And my friend said, girls. And I said, I don't know. Well, shortly after that, I'm walking up the hill, and the Lord's basically like, so what is it? And as I was walking up the hill after that, as fall was 1980, I really just gave my life completely to the Lord. I said, I've been a Christian long enough, I should have at least known the right answer. But God was just like, where are you in this? And I completely gave my life to Jesus at that time. And was involved in ministry. I'd already been involved in ministry even at that point, even in high school, as a camp counselor and things. But I worked as a youth director while I was in college at 2 different churches. I worked for the University of Georgia. But then when I graduated from the university, I had a degree in agricultural engineering, and I worked in civil engineering. And my wife was a youth director at a large Methodist church right across the street from where we lived, across the lake. And I would go to my engineering job, and I would leave immediately and go to the church. So I was doing ministry. I was teaching Sunday school. I was in the music program. And about 6 months into my engineering job, or actually about a year, I was there for a year. And my job was a hydrologist, and I was building lakes and dams. That was my job. And after I'd been there about a year, I started thinking, I wonder what it would be like to work in ministry full time. And I didn't know. So I made a list of what ended up being 50 people that I respected. And I went to talk to them, and I said, what do you do? And how do you know that God wants you to do it? And I talked to friends, family members, pastors, lawyers, people in different areas of ministry. And I really was wanting to know, what does somebody in full-time ministry do? And how does anybody know that God wants them to do whatever it is they're doing? I was really
How do you
on
know
a
you're
quest.
called?
How do you know you're called? Or, it doesn't matter whether you're in ministry, what we would call full-time ministry. I talked to school teachers. I talked to a lawyer, talked to some business people, and I had a lot of different answers in there. And several of them were very clarifying. One guy who was a pastor who I don't really think knew Jesus or even believed the Bible, but he said he went into the ministry because he thought it would be fun. And as far as I knew, he had a completely ineffective ministry, but he was one of my leaders when I was in college at our place. But that was very informative because I thought that explains. He just decided to do it. He didn't have a call or really a belief. I had another guy who was a businessman, and he said, God has gifted me with the ability to make money. He said, and I am good at business. I know people. I know finances. He said, how I live up my calling is I tithe my income, obviously, but I feel like God has gifted me to do what I do. And that was very clarifying because here was a guy in business, which I thought you do business or you do ministry. I didn't see how they fit together. And I was exploring that concept. And so that was helpful. A lawyer told me the same thing. God has gifted me. I serve people. I minister to people. Obviously, I tithe. So that was helpful. And there was one guy who'd started a Christian, it wasn't a camp, it was a boys' home, children's home. He'd grown up in Alabama. He's been orphaned, and he grew up in a home. So he had a vision to come to Gainesville, Georgia, for whatever reason. He had $60 in his pocket, and he felt like he was supposed to come to this town in this state and start a boys' home to minister to people like he was. And so he went knocking on doors at banks, and some banker believed him, and they started a ministry called the Eagle Boys Ranch. And 8 years later, I think it was in the Reader's Digest, it's this huge success story. And Eddie Staub is his name. And Eddie told me, we went out to eat. He said, I don't know if this is helpful, but this is how I felt God's call. He said, I felt like I was, being led to something. I was in a hallway, and almost all the doors were closed. But occasionally a door would be slightly ajar, but then there was one door that was just wide open, and I knew that that was the door I was supposed to walk to. He said, I don't know if that's helpful or not, but, that's how I interpret my experience. I said, yeah, that's helpful. So anyway, I went through 6 months, and I had a great job. My boss was an engineer. My secretary was an engineer. We were doing engineering, but we were all Christians. But I would come home and pray, Lord, just clarify, give me your vision, your call. And so one day we had, as a Methodist, we had an annual conference every year. And that year, annual conference was literally right across the square from my engineering office. And a guy from Houston, Texas, named Bill Henson, who was the pastor at First Methodist Church. He was from Georgia. I'd gone to school with his kids, and he was preaching at annual conference that week. So during the day, I would work, and then we'd go to sessions during the night. And our church was actually hosting it, and we were doing the music. Well, Bill's sermons were all about you're called to go. So I'm praying every day, Lord, give me a vision, sign. Every sermon is you're called to go, give your life. Every song that we sang, it was like, go, go, go. So as we were experiencing that week, I met Wendy, my wife, and a couple of my friends at a little restaurant down the street. And we talked over lunch. And then as I left the restaurant and I stepped across the curb to go back to my office, I really felt the Lord speak to me in my spirit. He said, leave your job and go to seminary. And so, very clear, just in a moment, just like that. So I go back to my office, I close the door, I kneel down, and I said, if that's what you want, then confirm it. And these are the things that I'm looking for confirmation. Number one, what is seminary? Where would I go? We would need a place to live. Wendy would need a job, or I would need a job, something. And then my boss at my engineering firm had hired me as his protege. And I said, I need to replace me. I need to find somebody. And I prayed that, and that was the last week of June in 1986. And so I made a couple calls. I went to talk to my pastor. He heard my story, totally said, let's pursue this, set me up. He set me up with an appointment at a seminary in Georgia, but I had a friend who'd gone to seminary, he'd been a nurse, and he went to a place called Asbury. It was up in Kentucky, and I called him. He said, man, you got to come up here. Not only that, you got to come this week because you need to come to a class. So I went up there like the first or second week, I think, in July. And Wendy and I got in the car. This was back in the days before the internet. You just had a map. You went to a place you'd never been. We drive up there on a Sunday. We drive into this little small town, Wilmore, Kentucky, and nobody's out. The dogs aren't out. Nobody's around. It's like a deserted place. We're like, where in the world are we? So then we go to class the next morning. It was Monday morning. They had J term, so they would have like 4 weeks of class in June and July. We went to that first week in the J term in July. And I remember it's Dr. Wong, and he was preaching on New Testament. And Wendy and I had been in the class, we're sitting on the back row, but for about 10 minutes. And we just looked at each other and we're like, wow, the Spirit of God is here. So then we left that class, we go to the admissions office, and we were both considering, possibly seminary. So we talked to them, they accepted us. But while we were sitting there, God gets up, the admissions director gets up and goes in the other room, and he makes a phone call, and he says, I think I found your couple. And we overhear this from the other room. So he comes back, he said, have you ever thought about being resident director, working at a Christian college? And what's interesting is we had gotten married in college, lived at the University of Georgia and married housing for a year, but we had actually applied to do a resident director position at the University of Georgia. Didn't get it, but we had thought through the process. Would we consider living in a college dorm and, helping the students for a free apartment, obviously? So we said, yeah, as a matter of fact, we actually had considered that. And now bear in mind, this is July, and classes start in August at the time. And so they said, we've been looking for somebody, for a couple. We haven't found them, but we think you might be if you'd consider it. So Wendy interviewed. And at 4 o'clock that afternoon, she had an interview. And by 5 o'clock, they had offered her the position. We had not been in town 24 hours. And God, with that job came an apartment. 2 meals a day in the cafeteria, which is awesome. We're right across the street from the seminary, literally less than 100 yards, because the seminary's on one side of the street, college is on the other. And so she has a job, a place to live. We're accepted to seminary. So all those first things that I said, where's seminary, where do I go, we need a job, answered in less than 24 hours. Bear in mind, this is only like a week and a half or two after that call.
Now it's time for Digging the Bible with the Provost of the Bible Seminary and archaeologist Dr. Scott Stripling.
First, we want to talk about the big news, which was in 2019, you were number 2 in the biggest finds. And can you explain that a little bit?
Well, right. We were voted on several different lists come out with their top 10 finds, and so we were on all of these lists, but one of them had us at number 2 with our altar horns from Shiloh this last year. And in the previous year, we were also number 2 on this list for the pomegranates that we were excavating, the ceramic pomegranates, which are a motif of the tabernacle. And so I'm really excited about those 2 number 2s, but I'm ready to be number 1 also.
Right. Well, maybe this year, 2020.
Well, that's right. That's what we've got our sights set on.
Well, you just got back from a dig. You were there for about a month or so, right? And can you just kind of share a little bit about what happened, what you find? and when you're going back?
Okay, well, I was able to take several of our TBS students with me, and so they're getting credit for going on these archaeological projects, and it enabled me to train them while we were there in our new technology of wet sifting and also in ceramic typology, in other words, how to read pottery. So my goal is that when our students graduate from our Master of Arts in Biblical History and Archaeology, that they're completely conversant in the technologies and all that they're going to need to lead their own dig and go on to do doctoral studies.
Right. And can you explain wet sifting a little bit for those that may not know what that means?
Well, right. It's a new process. What has always been done is people have dry sifted. So they have a mesh or a screen and they shake the material over that so that all the dirt goes through, and it enables you to see more what's there, toss out as many rocks as you can, and then examine everything before dumping it. Well, what we've not realized in the past was that we're missing about 70% of the evidence with that process alone. So we began to experiment with washing that matrix. So the mixed matrix that was going to be dumped, we now take it through a washing sequence, and we built a state-of-the-art facility at Shiloh where we do it. But once we wash it, what looked like a rock may actually be a scarab or a bulla or a seal impression that was just covered with dirt. And so what we did this winter, Blake, is we went through the old dump piles from 2 excavations in the 1980s and checked them. And so we dry sifted them, and then we wet sifted them, and then we recorded the findings. And it's really astounding. It's like for every 1 scarab that they were recording in the past, they were throwing away 4.
Wow. And what is a scarab for those that may not know either?
Well, most people probably don't. It's really interesting. The Latin word, I'm thinking of the Spanish word in my mind, escarabajo in Spanish, escarabus in Latin, is the word for beetle. So the Egyptians believed that the dung beetle pushed the sun across the sky every day. It's kind of weird in our mind, but I mean, the Greeks thought Apollo hitched up his 4 horsemen and pulled the sun across the sky. But the Egyptians worshipped the dung beetle, and so the scarabs are in the shape of the beetle, and then on the flat side, they have the iconography of a certain administration, whoever's in power in Egypt, that whether it's Amenhotep or Tutmosis or whoever it might be, then he has his unique iconography which no previous pharaoh has ever used and no subsequent pharaoh is going to use. So if you can get them in a clean context, you can then use them to date everything in that strap.
And it's a big deal.
It's a big deal, sure. And so you don't want to throw them away, obviously, because one of our main goals is to be able to date our occupational levels. And so if you're throwing away the evidence, and then so you'll hear people turn around and say, well, they excavated this site and they didn't find evidence that substantiated the Bible. Well, I guess not when we're throwing away 70% of the evidence.
So any neat finds that you can share with us?
Sure. There were a number of neat finds. We had some scarabs that came from the dump piles. We had bulla also, and a bulla is like a clay impression. So imagine that you take like a signet ring and you impress wet clay with that, and then you take a document, a scroll, and it's rolled up, and then you seal it with that clay seal. Now, you know it came from me because it's got my seal on it.
Right.
So if I'm sending you a letter, you go, oh, it's from Scott.
Right.
You know, I can see. You also know if anyone's tried to open it, because when I sent it, it was sealed. And if there's different levels of it, I could have multiple seals, like in Revelation. Worthy is the Lamb who was found, who could break the seals of the scroll.
And now you're in the semester now, but we're getting ready for another 7 weeks. Am I right? 7 weeks back out there excavating. Is there anything you can share about this summer coming up, and maybe how we can get involved? Those listening can be involved.
Absolutely, and we call this digging the Bible. So I mean, reading the Bible is wonderful, walking the Bible is wonderful, but boy, when you can dig the Bible, you're going to get a perspective that you can't get any other way. We are planning a dig season this year that's going to focus on a large monumental building at Shiloh, as well as the storage rooms from the period of the tabernacle. It looks like we're going to have the largest team in Israel once again this summer, but there's room for our listeners to join us and to be a part of this amazing experience. Right now we're focused on our spring semester, of course, so we're just got all of our classes that are moving along, but already doing the planning for this summer so that it's an unforgettable experience for those who volunteer. Well, I would just say this: you read it in the Bible, you find it in the soil. We have found hundreds of synchronisms between the archaeological data and the biblical text. And those who don't know anything about this can get my book, The Trowel and the Truth, and begin to read about those findings. And then they can be like you, and they can be first-timers and come this summer and join us on the excavation as well.
Exactly. And can we get that book on Amazon? Or?
Yes, you can get it anywhere on Amazon or from my website, scottstripling.net, or on the TBS website, thebibleseminary.org. And all of the dig information and dates and cost are at digshiloh.org.
There's so many people, probably even listening today, that have that same, I'm pretty sure you've heard it in many years of ministry. I have too. Even I've been in that situation. Lord, open that door for me.
Yep.
Help me, cause me to walk through or close the door. And I'm sure you went, as you explained it. What can you say to somebody who's in that position right now? Maybe there's a season change coming, just like for you and your family had so many years ago. What could you do what could you speak to that to encourage them today in that journey? Because it is a journey.
It is a journey.
You know, it is scary.
It's a faith step.
It's exactly, for sure. But
It's scary, but it's also thrilling.
exactly.
Because we can live normal day-to-day lives and just do the same thing all the time, or we can really seek God. And sometimes God says, stay where you are. Where you are is where I want you. And I've experienced both of those. In that instance, that's the backstory. I'm going to bring you up to date on the closer story. But my call was to leave your job and go to seminary. And when I got to seminary that first week, I was sitting between two people. The guy on my right, he said, I'm called to preach. The guy on my left said, I'm here because I grew up on the mission field and I'm called to be a missionary. And they both look at me and say, why are you here? I said, I was called to leave my job and go to seminary. And they said, what does that mean? I said, I don't know. I figured God will tell me what that means. And so I did. I went to seminary. We had a great experience, lived and worked there. But I felt called to be in that place at that time, and I had sought it out. It was a 6-month journey. So in that case, I sought God intentionally for 6 months, and literally I would come home and say, man, I just want clarity. And my wife and I were getting frustrated, but that was 6 months. The ensuing journey after that is I spent 25 years. So I worked as an engineer. Then I ended up going to seminary for 3 years. We worked as resident directors. I worked at the seminary in media. So I did everything in media you can imagine, photography, audio, video, etc. Also, I was writing. When I was an engineer, I'd written computer programs. And when I got to college, I was writing things for the professors. And I was actually, back in the days of overhead projectors, I was turning the professor's seminary notes for class into overhead projections. Well, little did I know that one day I would be in a seminary preparing professors' notes and things and doing that myself. So God was preparing me even then. But I ended up serving a church for 4 years and then another church for 4 years, and we had a cable TV show as part of that. In each of those instances, I felt that God was leading me into those. I wouldn't say I felt called necessarily to be the pastor or to do each of those things, but I felt a leading. The doors were open for each of those job opportunities. Then later, I went back and got my doctorate. I studied the internet, did a 3-year project across the country, working with a bunch of different companies. I created my own communications company. And in doing that, I was moving really into marketplace ministry, using my technical skills. Then I got back into education, but all during that time, it ended up being a 25-year sequence. I was doing different things that I felt led to do. And at different times, I was working as a pastor, working in business, and then I felt God's leading to do something. Well, toward the end of those 25 years, it ended up being 6 years. So on the one hand, I had a 6-month journey. Later, I had a 6-year journey. I felt like I'm working in a school. It was an 1,800 student school. We had a couple of properties. We had a bunch of land. And I was raising millions of dollars to rebuild that campus. That was my job. I was the capital campaign and then an institutional advancement. But I was also doing the website, the magazine, just a bunch of stuff for the school. But while I was doing that, I ended up being there 9 years. But I felt called to something else. But I didn't really define what that was. I applied for a bunch of jobs. I applied for president, vice president, different things at different colleges because I felt like I wanted to be in Christian higher education. But for one reason or another, they didn't all pan out. Either I got out of the process or they didn't choose me along the way or whatever. And I ended up, I think it was maybe 11 or 14 positions over a 6-year period. Toward the end of that, in the fall of 2010, I finally said, what is it that I feel called to? Let me just write it down. And so I did. And I'd been doing this for 5 or 6 years, and I hadn't literally just written down what I felt. What am I feeling, led or called to? So what I came up with is entrepreneurial leadership in Christian higher education. Now, I didn't know whether that meant a college or a seminary, but I knew that entrepreneurial, much of my career had been either fixing things in organizations that were broken or starting things that didn't exist. And I've had a bunch of opportunities to do all kind of things. I worked in a pregnancy care center as a CEO for 3 years. I helped start Christian Camp. I redeveloped our churches that we were in. Went through a whole process of relocating one of our churches. I didn't move it, but we went through the process of reaching that decision point. So anyway, entrepreneurial leadership. And I would go to these universities or colleges and they'd say, yeah, we want a cutting edge leader and change all this. And they were like 60 or 80 or 100 years old. And I was like, I don't think they want to change. Because I've been in churches that were 60 and 100 years old, and they say we want a new, fresh face. But when it comes down to it, they want to sing the same songs and do the same thing. Yeah. So we would end up starting a new service or a new program or whatever because the old group just wouldn't change. So I wanted to do something new. Anyway, I read online. I ended up finding, I think it was December or January, about this crazy group out in Katy, Texas, that wanted to start a seminary from scratch, teaching all 66 books of the Bible. And I thought, that is awesome. It doesn't exist. They love the Lord, and they want to teach Scripture. I'm in. Well, I looked it up, looked online, which was running by that point. But I looked up the website, and I had come to Katy, Texas, back in my doctoral program in 1997, I think. And we had visited great churches across the country. We came to this little bitty church that had just started out in Katy, Texas. And at the time, it seemed like it was in the middle of nowhere. We drove for a long time out of Houston. We drive up this road, and there's horses grazing on either side and white fences. And we drive up to this white mansion.
I remember those days well.
So I had come, and this was about a year or so after the church had started, and they were meeting on the second floor. And we had met with Jim Leggett and his leaders up on the third floor and prayed, and he kind of shared their vision. Anyway, when I looked it up, I think I've been to that location because I saw the horses and the fence, and I recognized the image. What I did tell my wife when I went back after that trip is I think there's something about Houston because of those pastors there get together and pray for each other regularly, and they believe that they are reaching the community together for Christ. And I don't see that in a lot of communities. So didn't know that I was being prepared for that. So I actually found the job searching online, but it was after a 6-year journey. So here's the conclusion of the backstory is I was accepted. They, vetted a bunch of people, and I was, they thought I was crazy enough to come and do it. And so they hired me to be the executive vice president of Bible Seminary. So I came officially in July of 2011. It was almost exactly 25 years to the day where I left my job. I had the call to leave my job and go to seminary back in 1986. And so my interpretation of my call, because I left my job in Georgia again and then came to Texas to start the Bible Seminary. But my interpretation of my call is my first one was leave your job and go to seminary because you don't know anything. I'm going to train you for 25 years. And I'm going to have you do a bunch of stuff, everything that can be done in the church. I mean, I've done everything from the toilets to the front door to the parking lot to buy land to build, all of it. And then over that time, media, fundraising, student development, seminary, all these different things. And then 25 years later, leave your job and go to seminary, this time to lead it because you got 25 years of training. And as I've continued to read the scripture, I realized that is not a new thing. God trained David under King Saul, well, first as a shepherd as a kid, then under King Saul as a warrior, and then even as a warrior under duress, he trained him to be a king. Moses was trained to be a leader in Egyptian society, the best of things. Then he's trained as a shepherd for 40 years. Then he's called for 40 years to lead God's people as a shepherd and as a leader in all these different ways. So I feel like God has done that in my life. He's led me through the process. He's prepared me. He's used me where I am, where I've either been called or led at the time, but he's always been preparing me for where he wants me to be. So I have to I still believe my clear call was leave your job and go to seminary. And I've done it twice. But the first time it was 6 months. So Blake, the long answer to your question was, sometimes God answers quickly and he wants you to be prepared to do something immediately. Other times God answers slowly. So I would consider 6 years, slowly. And as I look back, I'm, rejoice in my 25-year journey, but I can remember times where just in the doldrums of a day-long, days of whatever we were doing or creating, and particularly as an entrepreneur, you go through long seasons where nothing exists, nobody believes that it's even a reality, and you're just doggedly working, sometimes in silence, So God is working in those things. He's preparing. Sometimes he does it quickly. Sometimes it takes a long time. And some people may never have like just a clear call. I would say it's leading. So our call really is to follow Jesus and make disciples. But those leadings, where should I work? Or should I work? What is my season of life? That's what we're all always looking for.
This month's ministry update comes to us from Elijah Rising. Elijah Rising is an anti-sex trafficking ministry located in Houston, Texas. And with us today is the communications director of Elijah Rising and current Bible Seminary student David Gamboa.
2019 was a huge year for Elijah Rising. We opened our restorative care program, and what that is it's a 1 to 2 year program for women who we've helped come out of sex trafficking. And so we opened that. That was a huge step. We have a new storefront in the Heights where we're able to employ survivors of sex trafficking, provide them with jobs. So, it's a really easy way for the public to come in, engage with the issue of trafficking, and really help support those affected by it. We've been doing a lot of TV interviews. We're doing a van tour for Fox 26. But we have some awesome opportunities for the public to get involved. Every Friday, we do an outreach into places where there's a high likelihood of trafficked women. And so we do that every Friday. It's open to the public. So we encourage people to come out. I know it sounds dangerous, but it's really safe. And in our 8 years of doing it, we've never had any incident happen. We've only been able to go in these places and bless women and men. And we also have van tours that are available to the public where you get a group of 8 to 12 people. We'll take you on a van tour and teach you how to spot sex trafficking and teach you what to do about it. Your parents, this is so important so that you can be educated, because one of the things we're seeing now is traffickers targeting young children.
In 2020, do you guys have anything you're rolling out? Anything we can be looking for coming out?
Yeah, in 2020, we're really excited to come out with our first ever podcast. We're going to talk about not just sex trafficking and the issue of human trafficking, but we're going to talk about, share testimonies, how the gospel is really transforming people's lives. And we're going to share some really interesting stories about what's happening in Houston and around the world.
How can people get involved? How can they support Elijah Rising?
The number one way is you can pray. On our website, you can go and sign up to just receive a monthly prayer newsletter, and we send out urgent prayer requests, and that's the number one way you can help fight sex trafficking is through prayer. The second thing is you can volunteer. Come out on an intervention. If you don't want to do an intervention, we also have other volunteer opportunities on our website. And the third way is to donate. Become a monthly donor. We pay, $10, $12 for Netflix every month. $10 a month can really go a long way in providing a woman who is receiving healing and restoration and being launched into freedom. It can provide a lot of things for her. So that's a great way to support the fight to end human trafficking.
That's great, David. And also, I know you guys have a place out there in Kendleton. Can you speak just a little bit for our listeners about what's going on with the Kendleton
property?
Yeah, so a lot of the women that we take in have been brutalized by trafficking, and so our goal is to help them reach a place of wholeness, a place of where they're strong, where they're able to. Many of the women have children, so one day they'll be able to be reunited with their children. Right now we have one home that's open. We have 3 to 4 women living in that home right now, and then we have 4 other homes that we're preparing to kind of scale up. And so during this past year we've grown really, really quickly, and so we're very excited to begin to offer our services in those homes. We also have a ADA compliant home, which is going to be able to serve women with disabilities, and so that's one of the things that makes us unique.
Remember, this month is Human Trafficking Prevention Month, so make sure that you go to ElijahRising.org and you support any way you can. Take a van tour. I highly recommend that. Contact these guys. Remember to pray, volunteer, donate. David, it was great talking with you today, and I hope that we get to have you guys on a podcast very soon and hear more about what's going on in our area and how we can just kind of come together and help you guys as much as we can.
Yes.
You know, I knew you were a drummer back in the day, but you still are a drummer, right?
I still am, but my drums have been long gone. I sold them after I got to Katy because we had an entire bedroom with just drums and other things, and I just never had time to go in there, so I sold them to a guy who was going to use them.
So if you had to characterize your drumming and a drummer that you know and you love, right? Are you a John Bonham drummer? Are you a Neil Peart drummer? Rest in peace, by the way. Or, you know, Tommy Lee? I don't know. What kind of drummer would you characterize yourself?
Characteristic of how I would have drummed. I don't know how to characterize that because I don't even know some of these people.
Yeah.
So in my world, I listened to a song for decades, and I realized after decades of listening to it, I don't know if I even know the title of this song. And then, oh yeah, I just listened to the words for the first time. I've really just been listening to the beat. And by the way, who were the musicians and who played that? So if I was a sports fan, I would know the name of the team, but I wouldn't necessarily know the name of the players, the coach, whatever. So I don't know how to characterize my drumming. It was more like backwoods. Does this sound good, guys? Yeah, let's go with that. But I played marching band, jazz band, and then I played in a rock band, and then I played contemporary Christian things. And back in the 80s, when I was carrying my drums, most of the churches we would drive up to when I was on tour, they would say, are you planning to play those drums in here? And there were times they didn't want us to play the drums because it would offend the old people. But guess who came to me afterwards and said, I really love that. Old people would come up and said, I wish we played more music like that in here. So it was very affirming, but I was much more of a quieter drummer probably.
You know, if you're a drummer listening to this today, there is hope. Be encouraged by Dr. Lewis. We are pro drums here at the Bible Seminary.
That's right.
So did you ever wear a mullet?
I never did.
You never did?
Mm-mm.
Tell us a story about Stewie and the bee.
So my son, whose name is Mark, and we went to great trouble to name him, but when he was in the 6th grade or something, he decided to start calling himself Stewie. So his teachers all knew him as that, and even our friends, we would be talking about our son, and they didn't know Mark. And then we'd say Stewie, and oh, everybody knows Stewie. So we call him Mark or Stewie. But anyway, when he was a little kid, there's a little swimming pool out back, and we go downstairs, and Mark's going to supposedly walk out and hop in the little kiddie pool. He doesn't want to go out. He stands at the door. And I said, the pool's right there. He said, I'm not going out. And he was just literally throwing a fit. And he's probably 4 at the time, maybe 5. And he won't go out. And I said, why are you not going to? He said, I'm going to get stung. I'm going to get stung by a bee. And I'm like, there's a sidewalk to the pool. Just walk out the pool. And I got frustrated with him, and I promised him, you are not going to get stung by a bee. He takes one step out of the thing and steps on a bee. Maybe it was 2 steps. But he got stung. He looked up with me with the most horrible look of, you traitor. My father who I trust, you have betrayed me. And he started bawling, and I felt horrible. I was like, how does this happen? There is no bees anywhere. I can see, and anyway, and I'm like, God had to have warned him. You know, he was, I should have been more thorough. But anyway.
What is your greatest hope?
What I would love is for people to fall in love with Jesus. That's my passion, for people to fall in love with Jesus. You find him through his word. So we read and study his word, but, you know, Jesus said, you look for me in the scriptures, but I'm not there. I mean, he's literally right in front of it. But I would love for people to fall in love with Jesus. And when they truly do, their life becomes, they get converted. They go through a lifetime of sanctification. They're always looking out for others. They're transformed. And that transforms cultures and societies. So my greatest hope is that people really know and love Jesus Christ.
And then looking at this year, 2020, with the Bible Seminary, can you briefly just give us a vision that you can share?
We are 10 years into the Bible Seminary. We started the seminary in 2010, so our 10-year anniversary is this year. And after 10 years, we have graduated 66 students, so we're trying to teach all 66 books of the Bible. And so we are continuing to graduate more and more students. Our programming is fairly stable. We're always evaluating and improving. We're in the very closing stages of getting accredited, so we're working on that this year. Our goal is hopefully to get that by October, and then we would be an accredited graduate school. That will open up many new doors for marketing and fundraising and for students and even faculty and things. So we've been working hard to reach this point. So we're redoing the website. We're starting this new podcast. So we're really in a good place where we're using technology. We've got a good, strong group of core people. We've got a good team. And so my vision this year is that we can really establish a strong foundation. As an entrepreneurial organization that started from scratch, you would like things to just happen really quickly and you to be fully funded with tons of students and everything right off the bat. But that's not the way things work. And for us, what we thought might take 4 or 5 years is, at least taking 10 or more. But I think what happens is God strengthens you through that process. As you continue to grow and learn and you do something and something works, you go, wow, let's do that again. And when it doesn't work, you go, man, that was stupid. We're not ever doing that again.
But you learn from it.
You're learning.
Yeah.
And that's what apprenticeship is. You cut a piece of wood and you don't do it right. So you got to recut it and then you got to get more. And even in the hard times, which we've all experienced, in the pain, life and death and everything in between, Jesus makes it worth it. And it makes it rewarding, and it makes it palatable even, and it also makes it fun in the midst of it. So for us, I always use the phrase that it's a grand adventure. We're glad that you're part of the Bible Seminary's grand adventure.
Yeah. And there's room for you here.
There's always room
There's
for you
always
here.
room for you here.
And if you're listening today and you're like, hey, I want to be a part of what's going on at the Bible Seminary, you can go to thebibleseminary.org. You can actually donate there. You can actually register for classes. It's very easy to get that done. Or you can email us. We'll get you into a class. But as people are hearing today and they're thinking, well, maybe this might be something for me. This might be, I'm either older, long in life, or I'm 20-something, and I have so much passion ready to go. Why would you tell them to join the Bible Seminary on this journey as either a student or a donor, just part of this journey? Why TBS?
In my perfect world, everyone would go to seminary. I don't care where you work or what you do or whatever, you should study the Word of God. And you should study from people that have known the Word of God, that love the Lord. And so that is what we're offering. That's what we offer at any level. So whether you just want to study just for fun, whether you might consider a certificate or a degree, it doesn't matter. You can audit any of our graduate classes for just $300 right now. You can take a certificate class. You don't have to enroll in the whole program. You can just taste it. And I warn you that most people who taste it, they love it so much they can't quit. They just want to dive in, and they'll start at one level and they'll go to the next.
I started with one class.
Yeah.
I did too.
96 hours later.
And you're still coming
and
to
I'm
class
auditing
even
class
after
this
graduating.
semester.
Yeah. And that's true with a number of people. They have taken classes, they've even finished a program, and they keep coming back because they love it. So if you love the Lord, if you want to study His Word, and even if you don't know whether you do or not, but you want to explore it, we invite you to come test it out and taste it. And right now there's 5 or 6 or 7 different locations in the Houston area where you can do that. So we're excited to share that opportunity.
How can we be praying for you and praying for your family?
I think the biggest thing is just sustaining strength and grace. We have health challenges in the family. We have both of our organizations are, doing lots of things that we're leading. And so there's just always, all different kind of things going on in any week. We always think if we can just make it through this, frantic week, then next week will be better. But it seems like there's just week after week. So I'm very committed to living out the Sabbath. So I do that. That maintains my sanity. But I would say, praying for our health and our sanity and our strength and grace through it all. Again, it's a wonderful journey, but it's also work, and it's need that strength.
Thank you for making time to stop by. And if you want to get in touch with Dr. Lewis on any of the books or have him come speak at a church or a meeting or whatnot, you can go to Lynn Lewis, that's KLYNN Lewis.com. You can also find him online on Facebook and LinkedIn. And we're honored to have you, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. Stay connected with us at thebibleseminary.org and subscribe to this podcast.